Hey guys, welcome to today's video, and this video is going to check out the Callaway Rogue ST and it's going to check out the Taylormade Stealth. And the idea behind the video is we're going to find out which driver suits your game. So which one's going to be more fade bias or more draw bias, which head's going to be more forgiving, and we're going to go into a little bit of detail, and then I'm going to hit the Stealth and I'm going to hit the Rogue Max, and we're going to give you my thoughts on which driver might be better for you right now. So what we have here are just two rivals to each other. We've got the Callaway range, we've got the Taylormade range, and that's what we'll look at today. So what I intend with this video is to show you which is the most forgiving, which is the least forgiving, which one draws the most and which one fades the most, so you can make that decision knowing what you know about your own golf game. So first of all, I'm going to categorize the very high forgiveness golf clubs. And for that, we're looking at the Rogue Max, we're looking at the Rogue Max LS, believe it or not, and the Rogue Max D. These are really forgiving drivers. These drivers here have an MOI in the range of around 5,300 MOI. Now I know that's only numbers to you, but I can tell you for a low spin driver to be high MOI, it's a very rare combination. So over here for the high forgiveness drivers, now the mid forgiveness drivers. For that we're looking at the Stealth HD and we're looking at the Stealth. These have got an MOI around 4,700 to 4,800 MOI. This means that the drivers with this kind of mid-range MOI, they're going to be more forgiving than the drivers at the latter end, but they're not going to be quite as forgiving as these drivers here. Then finally we look at the Triple Diamond LS, which has got an MOI of around 4,400, making a little bit of room for this. And then in the 4,300 mark we're looking at the Stealth Plus. So the least forgiving driver on paper is going to be this Stealth Plus, followed by the Rogue ST Triple Diamond, then the mid-range, very similar between the Stealth HD and the Stealth, and then the more forgiving ones are going to be the Callaway at the top end. The Callaway have made a great driver this year. So if we focus on this Callaway range here and we start looking at the most draw bias to the most fade bias, and if you've not seen my Callaway review, go check it out. It's around a 40-minute video, but it'll look at these drivers in depth. And what we have is horizontally we have a COG that's 2 mil towards the toe here, which will create a fade bias. This one's 2 millimeters towards the heel that creates that draw bias. So when we hit the ball out the middle, it's actually a little bit off center from where the COG is, so it creates this gear effect that helps the ball draw. So we've got 2 millimeter towards the heel, 2 millimeter towards the toe, 1 millimeter towards the toe, and 0.5 millimeter towards the toe. So we could say most fade bias, slightly fade bias, tiny bit fade bias, and draw bias as it's measured by GOLFTEC HQ. Now if we start to look at the Taylormade range, this is where things get a little bit interesting. So if we look at the most fade bias, that would be the Stealth driver. And the Stealth driver itself has a COG point that's really in line with the Max, which is slightly fade bias. And that's how it's measured using the equipment at GOLFTEC. Then if we were looking at the Stealth Plus, this is a better player's driver, it's actually got a very neutral COG point. So it shouldn't be fade bias, shouldn't be draw bias, it should be very neutral. And then if we start to look at the Stealth HD, this has got a COG that is 1.5 millimeter towards the heel. So that 1.5 millimeter towards the heel is not quite as draw bias as the Rogue ST. So you can see most draw bias, next draw bias, then neutral, then tiny bit fade bias, equal, and then there you go, you've got the most fade bias. So I'll give you an idea. If you're somebody who's really trying to shift the shape of your shot, or if you're a real heel striker, you want to go towards these. If you want the most draw and you hit the ball out the heel. If you're a toe striker, you're going to have a better time with something like the Rogue ST LS. So first up is the Stealth driver, red face, black head, looks good. I think if it's a battle of cosmetics, this golf club does look better, and I think physically it appears smaller. It looks that way. It isn't really the case, but it just has that appearance that it's a little bit smaller. Matte black head, shiny bottom. Let's have a look how it performs. Now what I intend to do today, I'm going to hit 5 balls with a Stealth, 5 with a Callaway, and then I'm going to keep alternating. So I'm not dominating one driver and hitting it a lot and then having a long rest period and hitting the other one. I'm just going to keep swapping 5 shots at a time and then changing the data so we can see which one performs which way. Five down with the Taylormade. It looks like I got 1 down the middle, a little bit of a push shot. I'm not going to change my technique, I'm just going to hit the ball today. Now over to the Rogue ST Max. The head looks a lot better than older Callaway generations. I feel this matte finish on the top does look a lot better. It would be less glare in the sun, so I prefer to see this head It does appear a little bit bigger than the Taylormade, and you'll probably see that when you try this one out too. Again, trying it in a Tensei Blue mid-launch, mid-spin shaft, stiff, 65 gram in both. So let's give this one a go. Different feel, definitely a different feel. Okay, round one complete. I've 5 shots. We'll start looking. I'll go back into the Taylormade Stealth. It's difficult. I would say in terms of feel, the carbon wood wins. It feels a little bit more solid. This feels a little bit more hollow, but it's still a very good feeling driver. I think if the Stealth wasn't in my hand, I'd be really happy with the feel of this, but the Stealth just feels that little bit better, a little bit more solid. And just a little bit of advice when you are doing a fitting, one, take your own golf balls. If you're doing an iron fit, it's super important that you test with the ball that you're going to use. Second advice, pre-fitting, warm up. Your first 5 to 10 shots, probably not going to give you that great result, so warm up a little bit if you can before you're fitting. Stealth ×2. Now another thing that I want to say about this, the Stealth is much happier to sit slightly open. The Callaway seems to want to sit slightly toed in a little bit more. So I'd say this is more of a fade bias address position. That want to be more of a draw bias start position. So when we look at this data, have a look at that. A lot of shots hit. This kind of mid-range would be around a 300-yard drive. So in terms of how far it went, not bad at all. But really you can see that the red dots, there's a lot more red dots out to the right. A lot of it's down to my own performance, but a lot of it's just down to how that club performed. And I'd say the yellow driver just had this tendency to be a little bit more centered than the red driver. So all in all, the yellow, which represents the Callaway, tended to have a more centered drive. It didn't leak off to the right as much. So if we look at all this data, this is no data deleted, you get an idea of how these performed. And really we found that the ball speed tended to be a little bit quicker on the Rogue ST Max. The launch angle was very similar. The spin was a little bit lower on the ST Max, and they're using similar shafts. But that's partly because the side angle, that the Stealth started more degrees to the right. So that would lead to it spinning more. It would lead to the ball speed being a little bit lower. It's the main reason why there's a difference in those backspin numbers. That's where you've got to be aware of the data. Overall, if we go back into the average, you can see that the average is tighter on the Rogue than it would be on the Stealth, and the bias is more to the right on the Stealth. So that's all the data. And you've got to compare your bad shots to your good shots as well. So when you are looking at a driver, it's not about the longest drive of the day. It's about how the entire shot pattern falls. So what I've done now is we've taken out any drive that would not have found the fairway, and we're left with this kind of small push draw pattern. And we can see that ball flight seems to be very similar, the draw pattern seems to be very similar, the ball speed similar, launch angle similar, backspin within 100 RPMs of each other, carry similar, total distance similar. So all in all, these drivers, when you hit them out the middle, there's not much between them, and manufacturers have found that the limit of how far a ball can go is pretty tight. It's hard to improve on that, since the rules of golf have stated that drivers can only go so far. They can only create a certain amount of ball speed from the club speed that is presented to the ball. So what are the defining characteristics in a driver? If we cannot look at distance as an outlying factor, we're looking at a few pieces. We're looking at forgiveness, and the Rogue ST Max wins there. The Rogue ST Max was more forgiving on off-center hits. The other one is in terms of looks, and if you're looking at looks, you're probably going to pick the Stealth. So if you're trying to decide between the two, you've got the Stealth, which is a better looking, better player's version of a driver, and you've got the Rogue ST, which is a more forgiving and better looking than last year's Callaway model driver 2. Make your choice on performance is my recommendation, rather than looks, but the looks are important to many golfers too. So conclusion time. Well, both very good drivers, you expect that, but this is just one man's opinion. People in the comments do say that. I'm exposed to these golf clubs daily. I get to see them used. I get to do fittings with these golf clubs daily. And there's one club that will stand out, and there's one club that'll be hard work. And the Stealth, if you hit it out the middle, the performance on this golf club's fantastic. If you don't, you're going to get your ass kicked by somebody who's using the Rogue ST. This one, when you hit it off the toe or heel, it's more forgiving. It's going to save your life more often. Now, when we look at the Stealth range and we compare it to last year's Sim 2 model, it's not really an upgrade. It's lower MOI, it's less forgiving than last year's model, but the face cannot really be any hotter because there's restrictions on how hot the face is. It may be a drop in performance over last year's model. The marketing says the most forgiving in the stealth range, not the most forgiving Taylormade driver ever. Callaway, however, have created drivers that are an upgrade in performance over the Epic. So for me, this Callaway driver is going to be almost iconic in the same way for me that the Ping G410 was. The Ping G410 was a very good driver for a lot of people. You needed forgiveness, you go for the G410 Plus. You needed low spin, you go for the LS. You need a draw, you go for the SFT. The G410 was really, really good for a lot of golfers. The Callaway range is doing that again. We've got fade bias, we've got draw bias, we've got heads that are very forgiving, and we've got heads that are forgiving for a better player. If you're in the market for a driver, go get fit. All of these heads, you can't pick them up off the rack. They all behave very differently, from fade bias to draw bias to high spin to low spin to forgiving to not forgiving. But ultimately, the Callaway is the forgiving one. The performance-wise, they both go a long way. There's a limit on how far they go. Both of these, I'm pretty sure, are at that limit of how far drivers can go. And if you want one that looks good, well, this one looks really good.